There are a few simple points that we need to understand, a few simple misconceptions that people have regarding the most fundamental parts of Islam. The first is for us to look very briefly at the statement of Allah regarding Quraysh and what Quraysh used to believe. Because if you understood how Quraysh used to be before the coming of Islam, then you would understand why the Prophet ﷺ did what he did, and why or how it was that he fought against those people, and then he gave them a call to Islam and many of them accepted. To understand this, you have to understand what it is that Quraysh believed in prior to the coming of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And in this we can say very, very, very simply that Quraysh believed in Allah, who was their creator, their sustainer, the controller of the universe, the giver of life and death, the only one who can answer prayers in times of desperate need, and the one who sends down the rain. Quraysh believed in Allah as one supreme God, who was the creator, sustainer, controller, the giver of life and death, the one who answers the prayer at desperate need, and the one who sends down the rain. And I have lots of evidences for you in the notes, but I'll just give you one from Surah Yunus. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Say, who provides for you from the heavens and the earth, or who controls the hearing and the sight, and who brings out the living from the dead and the dead from the living, and who arranges every matter? They will say Allah, so say, will you not fear him?" So Quraysh believed in Allah, who was their creator, sustainer, provider, etc. However, along with Allah, they believed in idols and objects of worship. And these idols and objects of worship, they had an origin. I.e., they were not simply an idol that came from nowhere. These idols and objects of worship that they used to prostrate to, and they used to make dua to, and they used to seek help from, these idols and objects of worship had an origin. And from the origin of these idols and objects of worship were pious people. Some of them were pious people who lived a life of piety, and when they lived a life of piety, they became idolized, and they became made into idols and statues that were worshipped besides Allah. Likewise, the angels. Likewise, they had certain stones. They had the stars. They had the trees. They had the sun and the moon, and they also worshipped the prophets. So the question that any sensible person would ask is, how is it possible that a people who believe that Allah is their sustainer and their provider and the controller of the universe would possibly dedicate part of their religion to a stone, a tree, a prophet, an angel, the jinn? All of these are mentioned with regard to Quraysh, that they used to worship. The pious people, how is it possible that they would devote their worship to these objects, knowing that Allah is their creator? That's something that's very difficult to understand. And the Quran gives us two justifications that they made. One of them in Surah Al-Zumar and the other one in Surah Yunus. In Surah Al-Zumar, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, "Indeed, for Allah is the pure religion. And those who take protectors besides Him say, we only worship them to bring us nearer to Allah in position. Indeed, Allah will judge between them over what they differ. Indeed, Allah does not guide the one who is a liar and a severe disbeliever." So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that their devotion to their idols was not because they believed their idols created, or that their idols answered their dua, or they believed that their idols had control over the universe. They didn't believe any of that. In fact, they believed that their idols were solely owned and controlled by Allah. And the evidence for this is the talbiyah they used to make in the Hajj, when they used to say, "Labbaik Allahumma labbaik." They used to say at the end, "Illa sharikun huwa lak tamlikuhu wa ma malak." You have no partner, O Allah, except for a partner. You have no partner, but actually you do have a partner. And that partner, you own him and he owns nothing. This is what they used to recite during the Hajj. You have a partner, O Allah, that you own him and he owns nothing. So they used to believe their idols are under the control of Allah, and their idols are within the dominion of Allah, but that their idols would make them nearer to Allah. Their second justification in Surah Yunus, and they worship other than Allah that which neither harms them nor benefits them, and they say these are our intercessors with Allah. Say, do you inform Allah of something He does not know in the heavens or the earth? Exalted is He and high above what they associate with Him. All they did is believe that these idols were a middleman between them and between Allah. And we've shown that these idols were not all physical stone structures. Some of them were people in graves, some of them were the pious, some of them were the angels, some of them were the jinn. It doesn't matter what they used, but they used them as a middleman between them and between Allah. And when things got really bad, they would call upon Allah alone. Allah says when the waves would crush them from every place or would strike them from every place, دَعَوُا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ. They would call upon Allah and make the religion for Him alone. So now we understand the problem that exists within the Ummah today is that many of our Muslim brothers and sisters have fallen into the exact same actions that Quraysh fell into. Word for word, point for point. They have put people between them and between Allah. And when you ask them, why do you make dua? They say, look, I make dua to this person. Honestly, I swear by Allah, I do not believe that they have any control of the universe. And I do not believe that they answer my dua. I only believe that they are a middleman between me and Allah, and they bring me nearer to Allah because I'm so sinful and I'm so far away from Allah. So when I make dua to Abdul Qadir, or I make dua to Al-Sayyid Al-Badawi, or I make dua to one of these individuals, they bring me nearer to Allah. They take my dua and they make my dua close to Allah. And we see that this is the exact action of Quraysh, word for word and point for point. And there is no difference between it and between what Quraysh used to do. Quraysh used to call upon Jibreel and tell Jibreel to be a middleman between them and Allah. O Jibreel, answer my dua. O Jibreel, take my dua to Allah. They used to call upon Allat, and Allat was a pious person who was well known from the Arabs for his generosity and his piety. When he died, they built a grave. They used to go to the grave and they used to say, "O Allat, help us. O Allat, ask Allah to make us near to Him," and so on and so forth. And by doing this, Allah declared to them, or declared that the Prophet ﷺ say to them, قُلْ يَا أَيُّهَا الْكَافِرُونَ لَا أَعْبُدُ مَا تَعْبُدُونَ. Say, "O you disbelievers, I don't worship what you worship." Subhanallah. All because they used to make middlemen between them and Allah. They used to make dua to them instead of Allah. They used to call upon them instead of Allah. And to understand this, we have to understand what is the meaning of worship. And we have to understand some simple examples of worship. Dua is the essence of worship. And dua is the most frequently mentioned action that Quraysh used to do to other than Allah. And in reality, if we see the Muslims today, and indeed the non-Muslims today, we find that the most frequent act of worship that is devoted to other than Allah is dua. So the people would raise their hands and say, "O Ali, help me. O Fatima, help me. O Al-Hassan, help me. O Abdul Qadir, help me." And they would say, so you would say, how can you make dua to other than Allah? When Allah says, وَأَنَّ الْمَسَاجِدَ لِلَّهِ فَلَا تَدْعُوا مَعَ اللَّهِ أَحَدًا. The mosques are for Allah, don't make dua to anyone besides Allah. They would say, I swear to you, I do not believe that Ali has any ability to help me besides Allah. But he makes me nearer to Allah in position. Or he's my intercessor between me and Allah. And there is no difference between that and between what Quraysh used to do. And when we understand this, we understand why Quraysh rejected La ilaha illallah. Because La ilaha illallah doesn't mean there's no creator, there's no sustainer, there's no provider but Allah. La ilaha illallah means that you have to abandon making dua to everybody except Allah. and you have to abandon worshipping anyone besides Allah, and you have to abandon trusting in anyone the way you trust in Allah, and you have to abandon loving anyone the way that you love Allah, and you have to abandon fearing anyone the way that you fear Allah. This is the meaning of La ilaha illallah. And this is why Quraysh rejected La ilaha illallah. And they fought against the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. They had no problem with him as a person. Him as a person, they had no problem. They said, we will make you a king among us. We will make you a ruler over us. They had no problem in him commanding them or telling them what to do. But just stop telling us to worship La ilaha illallah. Stop telling us to make the religion for Allah alone. And again, I tend to emphasize this to people in a way people can understand. And I think most of you will have heard, and indeed many of you, if not most of you, will have memorized Surah Al-Bayyinah. And in Surah Al-Bayyinah, Allah says, وَمَا أُمِرُوا إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ مُخْلِصِينَ لَهُ الدِّينَ حُنَفَاءَ. They were only commanded to do one thing: to worship Allah and to make their religion for Allah alone, and to perform the prayer and to give the zakah, and this is the upright